The appointments are lined up.
You waiting for somebody in there?
Got an appointment.
And it's not about what you want to hear, but what you need to hear.
It's not personal. It's strictly business. It's time you and me had a private talk, Winger. Step into my office.
It's Step Into My Office with Michael Lombardi. Mr. Lombardi, we'll see you now.
And Mr. Lombardi will see 49ers quarterback Trey Lance. Lance is going to the office, Michael Lombardi. What do you have to say to him?
Well, look, I think it's really important that at this point in your career, you just have to find a way to get better at something. And every day work on improving in that area, because forget about the expectations that people put on you. Forget about where you got drafted. You know, you've got 2 more years where you know you're going to be on a team, and all that really you can control is showing improvement from one day to the next day to the next day, and not try to get caught up in the big picture. You don't have to worry about, I got to learn the whole offense. You got to learn certain things that you can do really well. And I wouldn't give up the battle yet. I would just continue to work on improving in the areas where you feel you can improve, which is decision-making, which is take as many mental reps as you can get. And when you run the scout team, which you'll run this fall, just really, really focus on giving the defense a great look, being really accurate, and taking those reps as gold, because they are for you in your career. They're gold. And there's been a lot of guys before you, and there'll be guys after you that have struggled. Geno Smith up in the Northwest. No one struggled more than he did. Expectations, even though he was only a second-round pick. And then he bounced around. So, look, we know this, that you're not going to start for the Niners this year. And you're not ready to start. It's not fair to start you. So let's take these reps that you get as gold and try to improve a little bit each day.
Yeah, the quarterback competition stuff, it's almost like Lance needs to be in a competition with himself to improve each and every day.
That's
and
right.
Then one day, then be able to, when that chance comes up, like how Geno Smith got, he's ready to go and ready to go ahead and lead a franchise. All right, paging Mr. Frank Reich, going to Michael Lombardi's office. Frank Reich.
Frank. I mean, like, seriously, you're lucky Al Davis doesn't own this team. Because if he'd owned this team and he drafted Bryce Young and gave up all those assets and you treated him like a quarterback that had no value, I'm not sure you would have been here today. In fact, I got a text from a former Raider employee that said Frank Reich would have been fired for insubordination. Whew. And he's right. Had he worked at the Raiders. Like that, I got that text. I'll read it to you, Frank. Like, what were you watching? Like, at some point, you have to change the script. At some point, you have to recognize your job is to make the decisions on the field based on what you're seeing, not based on what you planned. And that's really important. And I think you haven't done enough of a self-evaluation, because you're 0-4-1 in Week 1 games with the Colts. You have been a disaster in Week 1. Your team's not ready to play. So, and it looked like your team wasn't ready to play in Week 1 of the preseason. So I think you need to do a self-reflection. I think you need to kind of come back to yourself and say, what am I doing wrong? And listen to some hard conversations, because, look, you know, if you want to continue to have this job, you work for a man who's a billionaire. Just because you got a 4-year contract, you think he's not going to fire you? He fired Matt Rule after two-plus seasons, and Matt Rule had a 7-year deal. So you better get it going, because there is expectations, and his prized possession is that quarterback who you disrespected and allowed him to get the crap beat out of him.
Yeah, you would hope that Frank Reich would have learned from these slow starts in Indianapolis. It appears he has not, with what we saw in the preseason. Just one game, maybe they make progress, but it was not a good start for Frank Reich in his regime in Carolina. All right, let's get to another young quarterback. What's the message to CJ Stroud?
Look, you know, everybody struggles in the first game of the year. You know, it's not going to be easy. That's why you're here. It's going to be challenging. Again, work on what you can work on, improve. You're going to get a ton of reps. Trust your eyes, and you've got to get your arm and feet wired together. If you see the guy open on the out, just throw it. Like, don't overthink it. Play relaxed. And the only way you can play relaxed is if you really understand what you're doing on the field. So those mental reps and physical reps are really important. They're really going to be important. And the smaller the game plan, the better off it will be for you. I think there's no question. But you got to continue to work on what you see. And you got to remember, this is a fast game. And if you're going to stare down receivers, the free safety is going to pick you off every time. So just be aware of that. Like, we're not playing Indiana this week. We're not playing Michigan State this week, right? We're playing in the NFL. And those free safeties look at your shoulders. They look at your eyes. And you're going to have to move them. And you're going to have to feel comfortable moving them because you know where you're going with the ball. This is about preparation. Your talent can only become talented when you're fully prepared. Last week, you did not look prepared. You got to improve on that.
This is Step Into My Office, rolling along here on the Lombardi Line, presented by BetMGM. Up next, Shane Steichen, head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts have been making a lot of headlines over the last few weeks. What does Steichen need to hear?
I think Steichen needs to hear you're doing a good job. I mean, I think you're doing the right thing with Jonathan Taylor, and I think you're doing the right thing with Richardson. He needs reps. We all know it, right? I think the key for Shane Steichen, for you to have a good season, is Gus Bradley's got to have a good defensive team. You got to be right that Gus Bradley's a good defensive coach. You got to make sure that the defense can bail you out at times because you're going to be a work in progress on offense. I think what you need to understand, Shane, is right now you've had 2 weeks of your team. You've played one game. You kind of know who you are on offense. And so you got to know how you're going to play and how that playing is going to relate to the personnel that you have. And then the Jonathan Taylor situation, I think you've handled perfectly. Send him off the campus. Don't let him interact with the people. Don't let him be toxic. But when he comes back and he's cleared to play, if once he looks like he's trying to hurt the team, you got to suspend him for conduct detrimental. You can't back down to that. You're going to have to show the team, as the leader of the team, that you're not going to allow this guy to destroy the team because his agents convinced him this is the best path to go. It's the same thing that the agent convinced J.K. Dobbins. This is what's going on in the league. And as the leader, you got to stand up, and you got to protect your team, not necessarily protect Jonathan Taylor.
Jonathan Taylor, after being away to rehab that ankle, is back in Indianapolis there at Colts training camp, but he remains on PUP, and his stance has not changed. That is from NFL Network's Ian Rappaport. The last person heading into the office, James Harden, star point guard for the Philadelphia 76ers.
Well, look, James, I don't doubt what you said is true because it never made sense to me that you would take a pay cut to sign P.J. Tucker and other players without a promise or at least an understanding that you would opt out of your deal and we would enter into a new 4-year deal or a new 3-year deal with more money. To me, that's how I read last summer. I'm reading it that way today. I understand where you are. I think your best bet would be to not necessarily deal with this in the media, but I would deal with this with Josh Harris. The minute you get back from China, you should go meet with Josh Harris. You should go present the evidence that you believe you've been lied to and show him that, and then just tell him he needs to make a deal. Now, look, they're going to suspend you. They're going to find you. They have all the rights because you opted back into a contract. So technically, they own your rights. And you're at a point where your career where I don't think you're as loved by everybody in the league as you think you are. You know, I don't think you're the elite player that you think you are. You should know that because when you were going to opt out of the deal, but you found out nobody was willing to pay you more than what this deal was. That's pretty revealing, James. That's pretty revealing. You couldn't make any more money in the open market. You thought Houston was going to pay you. They didn't want to pay you. The Clippers could have paid you had you opted out, but you couldn't because nobody was going to pay you that money. At some point, as much as Morey lied to you, you got to look in the mirror too and say, okay, I'm not the same player I once was, and my expectations need to go temper down. There's only 2 people on the planet that still think you're a good player, Morey and you. They're the only 2 people that think you're an elite player. Everybody else in the league doesn't buy it.
That is Step Into My Office here on a Monday.
Was that a little too harsh on you? Was that a little too hard? How did you handle that one there? I mean, I know you're the you're very, you're the lawyer for all of them, but I mean,
I thought it was very pointed criticism and pointed advice for a lot of these guys. I mean, I'm not a Harden guy, so you're not going to get me out here putting the wig on for my man James Harden. So that's not an issue for me. But I thought. Well,
the Harden thing to me is pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
You could say. No, I've been around too many players, and what causes discontent is you've been promised. I mean, Taylor thinks he was promised something. I don't know what he was. The owner made it clear. I really believe, Femi, that Morey would have paid Harden, but I think somebody stopped Morey from paying him. And I think it's the owner. I think Morey would have extended him for 3 years and felt nothing to it, right? Because Morey still thinks he's an elite player. That's why Morey's sitting there saying, I'm not going to take less for him. Then, he's not worth it. Nobody sees him the way Morey sees. There's only two people in the world that see this guy as an elite player, Morey and Harden.
So Morey necessarily kind of has to fall on the sword. If it's like, let's say it came from above that said, hey, Daryl, you cannot pay this guy that kind of money. He sort of has to fall on the sword.
We're not paying him. And I'm not paying that guy that kind of money. I don't care if you have it in your I'm not committing this team to 4 years of that money. I think that's what happened. I can't prove it, but just knowing what I know about being an executive, I think that's what happened.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.